All right, let's go ahead and get started as our other colleagues may be joining. So welcome everyone. As we were talking at the beginning, I hope you all are faring okay in the storm and with the weather, and power is on and staying, that you have some sun soon. So was thinking about all of you as we were hearing reports and understand that may create some challenges for some colleagues to join today too. So we are going to go over SNAP ENT funding, the budget kind of considerations today. And this is the third in the session. Thank you for your flexibility rescheduling. We will certainly double check major community college conference schedules next time before setting a regular time, but appreciate your flexibility in doing so. So the first, just to recap the other meetings, the first meeting we really went over kind of the vision and what was the hope for it. And then last time around, we went over kind of who is eligible, how colleges can build this into work that you are already doing. And doing well. And then also really talked about how this grant is very different than other grants in terms of it being a partnership grant, because everyone is leveraging and utilizing their own resources, and how it's a really great opportunity to build partnerships. And so that's kind of the context for the grant. The Michigan team, Mark, anything else you would want to add to the context of takeaways from last time?
Nope, I think that's it. And nice to see everyone again.
Okay, we will go ahead and jump in. And I guess I realize there could be some new colleagues joining in case there's different finance folks. So I should back up and introduce myself. I'm Kate Kinder. I'm a State Strategies Director with National Skills Coalition, and then also had the chance to build out SNAP ENT programs in Oregon, and my prior role as Dean at Portland Community College. And Mark, you want to introduce?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Mark Goldberg. I'm the owner principal for Skill Strategy Consulting, working closely with Kate and the National Skills Coalition to support this technical assistance project. I had the pleasure of working with Kate formerly at Portland Community College as the Associate VP of Workforce Development, where we stood up our statewide SNAP ENT Community College grant with all 17 colleges. So pleasure to be with you all today.
And then this has been a very collaborative project. So one also that's really driven by Michigan leaders. So also want Lisa, Precious, and Jay Shauna, if you want to introduce yourselves quickly in case anyone is new.
Okay, sorry, good afternoon, Lisa McLeod. I'm a policy specialist. I work for Workforce Development under Leo, and I have been working on the expansion of FANT for several years now. So I'm really excited that we're moving into the community college arena.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Precious Miller. I am the Director of Basic Needs and Belonging at Michigan Community College Association. My portfolio has consisted of me supporting community colleges and setting up systems of support to make sure that the basic needs of students are met. So SNAP ENT is the perfect fit as I'm supporting community colleges and scaling SNAP ENT in Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Shauna Hicks. I am the Student Success Manager in the Office of 60 by 30, which is housed in the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. I oversee our Michigan Reconnect Navigator program, and also work closely with our director on the state's student success and college completion initiatives. A pleasure to be here with you all. And I also want to take a minute to acknowledge MCAN, the Michigan College Access Network, who's a huge post-secondary leader for our state. They've recently expanded their strategic plan to include workforce, and one of their priorities is to expand the usage of food FAENT assistance for students. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to also fold them into the conversation. So I'll give Jamie a chance to say hello.
Hey all, Jamie Jacobs, Deputy Director at the Michigan College Access Network. I see lots of familiar names and a bunch of new ones, so it's great to be here. We're excited to crash the party and learn alongside you and be supportive as you move into new spaces.
Great, thank you for being here. And then also key national partner that I know the colleges have been working closely with, Steve from ACCT. So Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. Steve Church. I'm the director of the Center for Policy and Practice here at ACCT, and we're sort of running a parallel project on SNAP employment and training with a lot of the colleges that are on this call. So this is sort of our next step is to reinforce what we are learning through this series of workshops and work on an individual basis with each institution.
Great. And then colleague Lindsay Reckling Cruz is also on at National Skills Coalition for a little bit as a senior fellow. Lindsay, if you want to introduce yourself, who's also working in Michigan. We're working to connect all the initiatives.
Yes, hi. Thanks for letting me join for a little bit today. I'm Lindsay Reckling Cruz, Senior Fellow for Post-Secondary Education, as Kate said, and I have the pleasure of working with folks from MCCA and from Office of 60 by 30 and Jamie and MCAN through our Technical Assistance Initiative focused on expanding financial aid for students who are pursuing quality non-degree credentials. So I'm sort of a fly on the wall today and just happy to be here for a little bit. So enjoy the conversation.
Thank you all. So with that, we are going to move into the agenda and start off with some bigger picture framing on how to really think of the budget in SNAP ENT and the opportunity and from a community college lens. So let me share my screen here. I can get my cursor to work. There we go. Okay, so as I said, Mark and I had the chance to develop the Community College Consortium in Oregon. Similar to Michigan, Oregon is not a state system. It's 17 very independently accredited community colleges that do work collaboratively. There is a council and a community college association that provides support for that collaboration, but I think there are a lot of parallels. And so this is meant to just be some framing to really ground in how to think of the budget with SNAP ENT, and then it's very different from many typical funding sources. So I think one of the things to think about with ENT, we've talked about in prior sessions, how that really build off of what you're doing, look at those programs. And so I think where SNAP ENT, the potential lies and the return on all the effort to get it stood up is really around that it takes a systemic and policy solution approach versus an individual fix. So I think it takes what you're doing with your coaches, with your basic needs and security, and it can make it systemic and sustainable. And so that's the big possibility and potential with this, is it can line up different funding streams and really maximize them so you are really increasing college access, college completion, and then connection to jobs with economic mobility. I know a number of you have seen the slide, but this is, I really think, like the slide on the left, in my experience working at a college in a lot of different roles for a lot of different years and in workforce, and with many students with low incomes, with parenting students, with Black, Indigenous, and students of color, that frequently our systems work more like the image on the left than the image on the right. And so I think, and it's left up to the student to try to find too often all the different resources and navigate them and braid them together. And so I think where SNAP ENT has the potential is to really be that flexible program and funding stream that weaves things together in a student-centered sort of way, so that it's designed for the student versus our systems. And so this is kind of the context of thinking that through. We were really fortunate in Oregon that we had former President Mark Mitsui, who was really passionate about increasing college access and equity, and really recognized, coming from the Obama administration and working in OCTAE there as a deputy assistant secretary, that that basic needs insecurity and the lack of alignment between programs was a huge issue for students. And so this is a podcast with many of that was created. Mark is the creator and host, and really has been a way to tell the story about the value of community colleges and the importance of SNAP ENT and centering students. And so the whole first season is SNAP ENT students, but wanted to play this clip from President Mitsui for some context.
You know, post-secondary education is the pathway to greater and more equitable economic prosperity for all. Everybody needs to have access to it then. If folks have basic needs and security heading into college, then it's a huge barrier for completion. And students sometimes blame themselves. And it's like, no, this is a system. These are systems for generations. No, it's not you, okay? These benefits, it's an important part of a success strategy to access these. And so there's been a lot of progress, and there's still a lot of work to be done.
And the QR code there is for the whole episode if you want to hear it. But I think that is the perfect kind of frame for why SNAP ENT and how to think about it. So one of the big things that I found to be the most effective element of SNAP ENT is the flexibility allows for a focus on equity and not equality. So my experience is too frequently in workforce programs, there'd be a funding cap, or there'd be an arbitrary, like you get $300 in emergency funds for the year. And that sometimes someone needed $500, and that $200 could make the difference whether that student dropped out or not. So with SNAP ENT, you have the ability to close those gaps and really center equity, looking at what students need and where those opportunity gaps. One of the things really want to emphasize here for colleges, and this was one that took me a long time to really get our fiscal folks, certainly, and was took a minute and was frequently an area of skepticism, is that SNAP 50/50 is a federal reimbursement grant where you get reimbursed 50% of your expenses to support SNAP recipients. But that money that comes back, as FNS has said to me, is washed of its federal identity and becomes a non-federal source of match and can be put back into the program. So one of the big things for consideration, we went through audits several times, is this funding stream did not go on a college's CFA. And this is the biggest signal that yes, indeed, this is allowable to use this reimbursement to go back into the college. So if you're not fiscal folks, I know that's probably not of huge concern, but I think that was the big point, just to know or communicate to fiscal folks that yes, indeed, you can put this funding back into the program. Yes, it doesn't seem, it's counterintuitive. Yes, it works different than every other grant probably the college is administered, but that's kind of the beauty of it. And so when you put it back into the program, it can it's generative, like compound interest, and it can keep growing. And you can use that to fund staffing, to fund tuition and fee gaps, to fund student support services. And so with that, this is an important consideration too, is usually, you know, when grant accountants, or I had this as part of my job, you need to like zero out your funds every year, make sure they're spent down. That's common accounting practice at the college. The SNAP 50/50 fund, you don't want to do that. So that's also really different, and you want to keep it rolling year to year and really generate those resources. So this is kind of the fundamental, like this doesn't seem right, and it is, but just kind of assuring. FNS does have a toolkit that has a lot of references of the OMB circulars that need to be followed, and all those elements that your fiscal folks, or if you're a fiscal person, pay attention to, but just wanted to kind of ground here. And in the pieces that I find just cause disbelief for seeing how this can work. And so here is why, again, from a student lens, it's worth to work through the disbelief and just kind of think about how this can work. So this was a student, Baker Al-Qarawi, who was an immigrant from Iraq and has started the college as a GED student, who is working in a low-wage job and has now been able to graduate and started medical school, I believe, or will in the fall. And he really speaks to why we need these systemic policy solutions and the benefit of SNAP ENT. He was a SNAP ENT student.
College student homelessness is an issue. housing insecurity is an issue and can severely impact students' academic progress, students' GPA, students' ability to turn in assignments on time. When you are worried about where you're going to sleep tonight or what's going to happen to you tomorrow, you are preoccupied with that to a degree that block you from actually paying attention to your classes. The advice that I would give is to strengthen the trust between students and teachers, so then students are capable of actually relaying to their teachers the challenges that they are facing, more particularly with housing insecurity, and ultimately be able to get the support and the help that they need. You know, the success of our students will reflect positively from all directions on the teachers and their abilities to work with students who are more particularly in need.
So I think it just really speaks to how this can, and the importance from a student lens. And I guess that's the thing I tried to think about, and thinking of policy and thinking of funding and thinking of building your program is center the bigger systems change that needs to happen, but also the students whose lives you're all aiming to impact and transform.
College.
So in terms of building the budget, I want to shift over to this. So I think when you're thinking about how to have a systemic approach and how to provide students with the resources you need and staff the staffing that you need at the college, I think there's kind of these were the three words that were repeated to me and that we really used in our guidance, is that really think about expanding, enhancing your existing services. That might mean in the future you look at new services, but those are really the three things you need to look at to make sure you're not supplanting. Is this something expanded? Is something enhanced? Or is there something new about what you're offering? And so really this is a resource mapping tool that we can provide after the fact. But if you think about last time you identified different programs and in the prior meetings that are happening at your college that you could build on. If you look at like a career pathways certificate, for example, an IET certificate, and that could be non-credit or credit, what could be expanded is you could expand capacity for coaching or holistic support around that. When you look at how that's being paid for in related expenses, there's the personnel and there's potentially scholarships that are offered there. And those could be from state scholarships, those could be foundation scholarships, just non-federal sources of funding. And so when you look at that, who's funding the personnel, and this is an example, is there's general fund from the college. There could be a state career pathways grant that's funding some of that. There are the foundation scholarships, there's private philanthropy, and then there's also indirect. And so all of those are sources of funding that you could leverage, you can build on what's working, and you use that indirect, your fully federally negotiated indirect rate, because that's what it costs the college to run a program, and you get reimbursed of half of that and put it back in. Equally, you want to look at what other what other federal sources of funding support the program that you need to be really careful or not captured for reimbursement, but can help support and amplify the impact. And so you may have Perkins funding, or you may have a Department of Ed Title III grant, or different things that are supporting it. That can be connected, but it just should not be part of your reimbursement and needs to be thoughtfully considerate of how do you align things. What you don't want to do with SNAP 50/50 or FAET Plus is set it up as a siloed program, because that essentially limits the capacity, and it also limits the benefit to the student. When you're thinking of scaling or expanding, it's generally the same kind of process in terms of mapping what your resources are. I think this is when you can have space potentially to do more new services. And so Virginia, for example, is using Single Stop as a benefit screener for all their students at their community colleges. And so they are using it as a screener for SNAP ENT. And so they are capturing the costs for Single Stop, which for those of you who don't know who it is, a virtual platform that's a benefit screener, and then it guides students and tells them what they might be eligible for and where they can apply for it. So it's a really great way that's frequently included in onboarding for colleges. So in Virginia, they use Single Stop. They are using that to recruit for their SNAP 50/50 program. And then they are also connecting students to other benefits. And then they are getting reimbursed on the costs for both the tool itself, there's a licensing fee, and the staff that go with it. And then this is an example of kind of how you take this resource mapping. You know what programs you want, you know what funding you have. If you look at the budget on the right, this was one of the program budgets that was used for SNAP 50/50. And all of the green lines are non-federal sources of funding that we could use and in our SNAP 50/50. And then the orange are sources of funding that are clearly federal funds that we could not use. The other, the like lighter orange, so PPS and MMT Bridge, those were sources we thought were fine, but we traced back and actually realized they were federal in origin. So that's the thing you just need to be conscious of. But if you look at it, that leads a lot of funding streams that are likely part of a workforce development or college budget that could be leveraged. And really thinking about how to align that and capture those different funding streams.
Hey, Kate, just real quick, since this is weedy into the finances here, did you want folks, if they have questions, to wait until the end or just chime in?
Oh, no, please chime in. Yeah.
Either via chat or unmute.
Yeah. And if you could call out the chat if as we're going along too, would be great. And what I will say is, I know some of you on here, I should add that context, are probably more program folks. We found that it was actually really helpful for program to understand fiscal and fiscal to understand program in ways for most grants you don't need to. So while, and I think we got this feedback regularly, even the coaches appreciated understanding how the budget worked. Because they, and I'd say even though it wasn't their responsibility, but they were sometimes able to suggest other sources of funding we were using or things that we could leverage. So it was helpful for them to understand how it all fit together and requires a bit more collaboration there. And then in terms of how you take all of this into your budget, you know, you'll get the SNAP ENT budget. There's a lot of tabs. Just as an FYI, it looks overwhelming, but it really is kind of fundamentally these categories that are pretty consistent with other college budgets that you do. And you'll see this was the framing. I think Michigan might use different framing, but total local funds is was essentially that was the 50% match we needed to have. And then the total program cost is what we spent. And the total 50% was what we would get back in reimbursement. And so this is, as you're thinking about the budget, you're mapping the resources, you figure out what you have. These are the categories where you can get reimbursed on. As you'll see, personnel was a huge source of reimbursement, as was indirect. And this is a sample realistic budget for one of the colleges in Oregon. With that local fund and that match. So just showing that, yes, we spent the money for the total program costs, that 50% we have is non-federal funding, and that then we get the 50% back.
Hey, can I just weigh in on that for a minute? Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple things. I think it's really important that you're right. Policy people are looking at this, and it's also different in Michigan with the Michigan Works agencies when they're delivering these federally funded programs and state funded programs. So when they're thinking of program costs, when they're seeing a budget coming down from workforce development, they're thinking potentially of the reimbursement value. So I just want to point out here, it's really important that when you see program costs, that's the expenditures that the college made or your CBO made. That's the total expenditures. And then the 50% is what we are drawing down from the feds. However, just to make sure we're clear here, we do transfer 40% of the reimbursement. 40% goes back to, of the expenditures goes back to the community college, not the full 50%. I think everybody's pretty clear on that, but it does go out as FNS allowing 50% back. The only other topic I want to touch on real quick, and I know this goes backwards, so apologies, is the single stop. I'm going to assume that the single stop isn't really looking at it, a benefit screener from SNAP eligibility, more from the receiving SNAP, and so they'd be eligible for SNAP 50/50. And that's how the colleges could draw down funding, because they're not determining eligibility for those SNAP benefits. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a good clarification. It's an outreach. They're using it as outreach, like and not SNAP outreach. I should say that it is it is part of the program outreach, not benefit outreach.
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And then you'll see here, there'll be a place in the budget where you list what your different funding sources were. So here's an example of the funding that we said would go into our, and I should clarify, STEP in Oregon is our SNAP 50/50. So STEP equals FAT plus. So that's what that STEP is. But this is an example of, you have the budget, what you're going to spend, you identify where the money is coming from. All of this funding here that we used was money that was not being matched in another grant. So that was a element, but you'll see in many of cases, obviously there was a lot more general funds supporting the department than this, but this was the amount we were allocating. There was a lot more of our JP Morgan Chase grant that was funding the work, but this is the part that was specific to our SNAP 50/50 work that was, we could point to what was being enhanced, expanded, or leveraged. So I think it's kind of thinking about, what are you capturing? How are you paying for it? And that really will get you your maximum reimbursement. And then this is kind of what you'll see overall. It's just, this is then you roll this up into, you'll have a total program cost and a total supportive service cost. And so the budget, I think I'm trying to break it down into just kind of the highlights. So when you look at the budget tab, if you start kind of, it can look like a lot, and it is very parsed out. But if you think this is what you're really rolling into, and even if you start from this, how much money do we have to spend? What are we building out? And then work back. That was a helpful process for us. Who are we serving in that? What support services are we doing? But just really wanted to emphasize, just keep the big picture in mind, and then working your way into the very detailed weeds for the budget can be helpful. One of the big pieces I wanted to highlight, and I can share any of these forms that you have. I also have sample college budgets that I can share if they're helpful, is one of our biggest sources of funding, as is consistent with colleges in general, was personnel. So this is how we captured and were reimbursed for the majority of our expenses in the consortium in Oregon, was time and effort. And so this was not like your typical time and effort form where you have to show every minute you spent your day on, as sometimes happens with federally funded folks. This was, we would just indicate how much time we spent working on the SNAP 50/50. And that could be meetings, that could be serving students directly, that could be all sorts of stuff, but just could it point to SNAP 50/50? And then this rolled up and calculated for us our actual expenses that could go into the invoice pretty easily. And so this was a really straightforward way to see how much time we were investing and then get reimbursed on our time for doing that work.
Kate, did you see there's a question from Precious in the chat box? When colleges submit their budget, do they need to specify where they're pulling their non-federal dollars from?
Lisa, do you want to answer for Michigan?
Yes, when they submit their budget, they're not giving the amounts of each funder like Kate just showed, but they are saying, I've got $200,000. These are the resources I'm going to use. We're just listing the ones. And obviously, if they change at the time of invoice, they change. But when they're coming into it, they have somewhere this $200,000 that they can identify in sources.
And then looking at the invoice, I think this is the other thing is as you're building the budget, you want to think about the invoice, which is really great because you'll get a sample of what the invoice is. So you can build your systems and budget back from that from Michigan. But really, if you look at these are the line items for Oregon that we had. And so really everything was designed around, all right, how are we going to track our salary and benefits? How are we going to track the non-tuition payments? How are we going to track tuition, travel and training that has to be approved, and then all the SS is support services. So I think those are the things just keeping in mind of this is what you will be reporting on and through the MWAs in Michigan. And so just being thoughtful about creating a process and taking the time to streamline it can be really key. So that you're able to maximize the reimbursement and also have things really straightforward for reporting. One of the things I will say for the colleges is most colleges did do as much as possible through their own systems. So their student record systems, for example, Banner was the most common one used in Oregon. And so tuition payments would be applied on there. Bus passes would be applied on there. Bus tickets or bus parking passes, tools if we were able, or if we had to pay for a vendor, we had those receipts. So there is a way to kind of incorporate it into current processes. Some colleges are also tracking a lot of the just their different work that they were doing in their different kind of student engagement, student alert systems. So there's potential to incorporate it in what you're doing. You'll still need to report it through the MWA process and that, but I think when you're thinking about how to build this in, there's a way to do it within your systems that you have. And then the other piece, I've touched on this before, but just really think about how to amplify other funds. So all of the funds on the right are not funds that you can use in SNAP 50/50, and they can certainly support your students. So I think one of the great things is with, having the collaboration between MWAs and colleges is how can you use WIOA Title I to potentially pay for some things? And then you use SNAP 50/50 to pay for staffing or something else, or just the myriad of different funding streams. How can students get Pell, but also, potentially if they're too late to access Pell for one term, you can cover their tuition expenses with SNAP 50/50. That was a really effective enrollment strategy that we had and how it really closed some equity gaps for students. So be thinking about it holistically. What are the programs you're trying to build? What are you doing for students? What programs are you leveraging? What funding are you leveraging? And then how can you create a system that's easy for you? And most importantly, is easy for students to navigate. And as part of that is really weaving it into your benefit access work. So if you have onboarding, is really great to hear about what some of the colleges are doing. So hearing about Grand Rapids and Mott and some of the really intentional focus around connecting students to resources holistically. How can you weave this in as a place where when they're going to the food pantry, they learn about SNAP ENT, or they get connected to SNAP benefits so that they are eligible for SNAP ENT. So really thinking holistically about that student journey and how you can use that to increase connections to the resources, but also reduce stigma from accessing it. Another couple other things just for college folks is the things that I ran into myself. But I think, and it took a long time. I was really fortunate. We worked really hand in hand with a grant accountant and our fiscal team. So I think, again, I mentioned that before, but this is really key. When you are looking at how to frame this, one of the big things is the support services are referred to as participant reimbursements in FNS guidance frequently. That does not mean you have to reimburse participants in order to issue support services. That's really important for colleges to hear because the paperwork that would be involved in issuing W-9s and reimbursing students the receipts would make it really prohibitive. So you can apply the funding to the student's fund directly, The other thing is match is not matched in the traditional sense of leveraged funds. So when you say you're reimbursed 100%, you spend money, you're reimbursed 50% from FA&T plus, the other 50% is you have to show you have match. That is not matched like it is in your usual workforce grants where you say we're leveraging these funds. It's actually the money you spent for the program. And then I think I mentioned the fiscal intertwine. Our gotcha friends, I think the other thing is just would really say that need to be really intentional about communicating how this program works to different fiscal folks, especially as things change and roles change and leadership changes. There was a lot of folks who came in and were sure that this was illegal and this was could not be the case. And so just really having that communication, I think, is important. And the other big thing, just to kind of illustrate why this is worth it, is if you look at this is a slide for Oregon. And this is one, if you really need case making for any of your college leaders, or even some foundations, this is the one that a lot of times turned folks over, is the bottom line, orange line, is existing funding that we had in Oregon. Oregon doesn't fund anything. So I think that's also an important case, especially when we were doing this. And so we really looked at what funding we had and how we could intentionally allocate it. And when you put it back into the program, the blue line was the actual budget over time because of compound interest approach. And then with a reminder of why this is all worth it, wanted to end here.
But one thing that I found different from this is because I started school, I had a hope that I didn't have the first time. Once I graduate school, I see where I can go into not just one profession, but thanks to the schooling and the certificate I'm going to be getting, I can go into 4 different professions. So I'm never going to be falling back into a spot where I can't do something for my family. I'm never going to fall back into that hopelessness again, because now I'm getting that education. I can always get something else. So for this time, like I said, school has been a big blessing for me. But
so with that, I will stop sharing. And any other questions here? I see Susan's, and yes, the match piece is what's confusing. Susan, do you want to comment about it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because and if I was FNS, I would restructure how those budgets look in the state plan, because you do have to show like federal and non-federal, and it looks like 50-50. You're getting a 50% reimbursement back. But really, practically speaking, what it amounts to for you as a provider is that you actually have to have that full non-federal upfront investment, and then you're getting reimbursement back on it. And so I sometimes find it helpful to just take the word match out altogether, even though that's kind of how it looks when you have to build out your budget. It's practically speaking, it's not what you have to sort of demonstrate in the process and what really happens. You can't sort of think about it that way, sort of when you're sort of forecasting what sort of at the end of the day the outcome is, but you still have to have that non-federal full investment up front.
Yeah, I would agree, Susan, that our budget that we use, that I don't think we're going to go into today, because like Kate mentioned, it can get into the weeds and be overwhelming. The MWAs have seen the budget. They know what it looks like. I think all the colleges have seen it. But really what we're asking for in your budgets is for you to just say what it costs to serve your PLUS students. And then it just inherently says, okay, this is what you're going to get reimbursed. Because what it looks like in the state plan, I think can be it doesn't line up with that. Let's just say what it costs to serve these students in PLUS. And then this is what our maximum reimbursement could be if we're able to serve to the potential of our budget.
Yes, 100%. Agree with both. And I think it is I would keep the match out as much as possible, and I should have added more context. I'm adding that in there because if folks have seen FNS guidance or different things, it will say match. And what I found is that I'd be like, this is a reimbursement grant. You get reimbursed 50% of what you spend. And then they get into it and be like, well, wait a minute, it says we need match here. What's the match? What's this mean? So just think, so this is so you can kind of understand, to explain to fiscal folks. Nope, it's just think of it as a reimbursement grant. We need to have non-federal source of funding. We spend this, we get half back. And then we need to just show that it's non-federal funding that's paid for it. And so just be ready to have like Susan's explanation ready, Lisa's explanation, because it is unfortunate it didn't just start out as called a reimbursement grant and wasn't framed this way, but people have different levels of understanding, have heard things. So I think it's really important clarification, because there was one college that was doing this wild like match tracking thing that was a lot of work. And so of course that's not going to help things along.
Good.
Oh, go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I have two questions. I guess first, Lisa, you said that we should have seen the budgets, and I'm just wondering when.
Well, okay. So you may not have seen them. They are out there, and they're out there linked in our policies, the FA&T manual. So I thought people may have, but I do believe we're going to send them out, or at least the snapshots of them. So they are out there for anybody to look at. But it just like what she showed, it's just your personnel, salary, your materials, but FNS is required to budget by activity. So that's where it gets kind of messy looking. Now, fortunately, community colleges do some type of training component, right? So they're not going to have, they're going to have a more normalized budget, I would say. But, there's about 10 activities in the FNS toolkit. So if you're only operating with training and maybe a supervised job search component, you don't have as many budget activities to fill out that roll up to that budget that Kate showed. But yeah, we can definitely share those.
Okay, thank you. And then Kate, I believe it was on your slide 16 or 17. I just wanted to clarify, in that circle, were you saying that those are things that couldn't, it looked like there were a lot of federal sources there, but then there were some state sources also. So were you saying those were things that could not be counted? So can you clarify?
Yeah, that's good clarification. So if they can be traced back to federal sources of origin, you can't use them. So those are some of those funding on there. It was hard for us to delineate between what was part of the state pot of money and the federal pot of money. So we did not use them. So I just illustrate those, and that you want to be, what I've seen colleges do is they set it up. They're so scared of having federal funding touch the program that they set it up as a silo on the side. So you don't want to do that. And then you just want to leverage any state or non-federal sources of funding and make sure you're clear where the federal funding are. But that doesn't mean it can't support the student or the program as a whole. Right. So yeah.
Okay, because one of the questions I guess I had specifically relative to like those like state funds is, I know, for example, there are some programs where there are federal dollars coming to the state and then being passed to the colleges. But then I'm certain that we have some others that are funded by state general funds. So wouldn't those be an example of an opportunity to recapture?
Absolutely, yes. And that's actually a perfect transition over to hearing from Michigan, and we'll have more Q&A throughout, but want to let Jayshana talk a little bit about that exactly for that purpose of how to leverage state funding.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. So in light of our discussion about funding, the Office of 60 by 30 was asked to kind of uplift some of the state scholarship or programming that our office administers that the community colleges actually leverage right now. And I'll like kind of highlight that which ones are actually like state funding and it's not tied to any federal dollars. So first is our Michigan Reconnect Scholarship Program. As many of you are aware, it provides individuals 25 and up with no college degree with the opportunity to earn an associate degree or skill certificate at their in-district community college or receive discounted tuition at an out-of-district community college, including the state's 3 tribal colleges as well. Those funds are general funds and it's state dollars. Recently, the Michigan Reconnect Act statute was amended, and one of the great things that was added to that was this opportunity for community colleges to leverage state dollars for awarding credit for prior learning. So community colleges, if they award credit for prior learning for their students, they would get reimbursed $80 for credit. And that could be like advanced placement, CLEP, military training, industry credentials, you name it. That will also be state dollars. That right now, new law currently does not exist, but starting effective March 29th, that's when the new Reconnect Act requirements will come into play. And so that credit for prior learning process will be another mechanism for community colleges to receive additional state funding. Our second program is the Futures for Frontliners program. This one does get a little bit funky. It started out as federal funds to administer the program through GEAR funding. However, starting in FY23, it's actually using state appropriation for those students that are part of that legacy cohort, because this program is currently closed for new students, but there are currently a cohort of students at community colleges, and we call this funding that we're using for them the legacy funding. Again, it was initially federal funding when it first first got established in terms of administering the program. However, again, starting in FY23, the money that community colleges are receiving is state appropriation. I can't speak to like how you guys would decide on which way to use that, or just ensuring that you are just using the current FY23 funding if you decide to use this funding. So just want to acknowledge that Futures for Frontliners program that can get a little bit gray. In addition, we have the Michigan Achievement Scholarship that is coming our way. That is administered, however, by the Department of Treasury. But again, this is state dollars. I am aware that it was like 50 million one-time funding, then 50 ongoing, and then like a total of 350 that was mentioned for the FY24 budget. Again, this will be scholarship opportunities for students, graduates of 2023. They can go to a community college, private colleges, or public universities. But speaking for the community college proponent, a student could receive up to $8,250 for over 3 years at a community college. So again, acknowledging that is state funding. And then lastly, want to highlight some of the things that the governor mentioned in her budget presentation a couple weeks back that I think would really be key for you all, and actually helpful in terms of like just brainstorming about what funding you can use to leverage this opportunity. One, there would be continued funding to support Reconnect. So a one-time funding of a 10.2 million increase. So it's just kind of a signal to show that Reconnect will continue to expand and it's here to stay, and it's something that the governor has put in her budget. I will say that there was also a recommendation to expand it in terms of the age limit. So for I think for about 3 years, the governor has proposed that individuals 21 and up could take advantage of Reconnect. That 21 to 24 age, those are federal dollars. So just remember, if it does expand for individuals 21 to 24, that would be federal dollars, but the 25 and up, which is our current program, the ongoing funding is state dollars. The other two budget items that I want to mention is the governor also proposed $30 million for student wraparound services and basic needs for public community colleges, universities, and tribal colleges to kind of support their current mechanisms for emergency housing, childcare, on-campus food pantries, emergency grants, mental health services, you name it. They will be more like in a form of grants, I believe, but that is state funding. It'll be one-time state funding though. And then lastly, she also proposed $25 million for the College Success Fund. It would ultimately provide competitive grants to institutions of higher education to adopt best practices, redesigning some of their initiatives in terms of student and workforce needs. That will also be one-time general funding, so state dollars again. Again, those initiatives that I mentioned that were proposals have not passed yet. Obviously, it has to go through the legislature process, but I think it's worth advocating for and keeping in mind as we think about this current expansion of our FAE&T program. And that's all I have. Happy to take any questions as well.
As folks are thinking of any questions, thank you, Jayshana. That was, it's really amazing and inspiring to see like all the investments Michigan's putting into access to education and closing equity gaps there. And that is a lot of state funding that could be leveraged in FAE&T, but that would be reimbursable funds for building out your program. So I think one of the things we did sometimes is we would apply for those competitive grants and actually call out that we were going to use it to seed and expand our FA or our SNAP 50/50, or in your case, FAE&T, and that strengthened our applications at times. So just consider that. And then I realize I caused confusions with my image, just want to underscore if it's state funding that is, or state tuition assistance that is not traceable to federal funds, it can be used in FAE&T. So I think that was really helpful, Jayshana, that you just did a lot of the research that's hard to track back. And things are even around knowing, for that the Reconnect, that 21 to 24-year-old is going to be federal. And so you look at all the ages above that. So that right there is an amazing amount of resource. So thank you for doing that work. Any other questions before we hear from Precious too?
I just wanted to add something really quick. It's when your state government and your lawmakers are getting ready to vote on these types of funding streams, I think there's opportunity to educate your representatives about what the potential of that investment could be. And FAE&T is kind of a cool, compelling concept to say, hey, if the state's investing this, they're actually going to bring in more revenue. That's not always possible, but where there's opportunity to have that dialogue with those who are making those decisions about what the state's going to invest in, it's a compelling conversation to have.
Absolutely.
There's a question. Oh, sorry, Kate, in the chat box about mileage.
Millage.
Lisa, do you want to answer that?
I would assume that, yeah, that local millages, city, state, yeah, that would be any type of revenue that they're getting that's coming directly from the state. But I'm not the expert there, but yeah, as like you say, as long as it's not being used as a match for a federal grant that we have. And that's the thing I think, you know, Jay Shauna is very helpful to take that back and figure out tracing those dollars back. I do know in our, I mentioned before, in our adult education funding, our 107, that we have looked at that funding and we have determined a few years ago that the majority of it was used for a match for federal adult ed. And so it wasn't something that we would use as a, or accept as a source for non-federal. So yeah, getting that back. And if you've got a funding source that you're not sure about, like, you know, get the information up to us, we'll get it to our fiscal. There's got to be somebody that we can contact to make sure we can find out if it is used as a match at the state level for a federal grant.
I'm sorry, this is Robert. I do have another question. The power is actually going out where I am, so I keep getting disconnected. Jay Shauna, you talked about both Reconnect and Futures for Frontliners, and with Reconnect and the expansion to, is the expansion to short-term programs becoming official in March? And if so, would those programs qualify as well? That's the first question.
Yeah, so the Reconnect, like the skill scholarship component, that will begin in March, but that is federal dollars. But there is a 10 million that is a part of the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, which is really for like 18 and up. It's not the 25. That is state dollars, because the Michigan Achievement funding in general is state funding. And then the legislature gave us 10 million of that for skills training. But the Reconnect skills training that's going directly to Leo, that will go directly to you, that's federal dollars. And to lower the age is federal dollars as well. So what you want to use is just the Reconnect funding that is kind of going on now, 25 and up. And the new things that are added to the program, keep in mind that's federal dollars.
Okay. And then the second question was related to Futures for Frontliners. And I believe you said that it would be moving into fiscal year 23, that
yes,
it would be state dollars.
Yes.
At that point. And so yep. would it apply to both tracks of those being supported in Futures for Frontliners?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Wes?
So would it apply to both tracks of those being supported through Futures for Frontliners?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we hear from Precious? And if you have another question, we'll have time throughout too. Okay, Precious, just want to have space if you want to add any other thoughts too.
Yeah, thank you, Jay Shauna, for all of your remarks and sharing how our state is really primed for us to thoughtfully consider about using SNAP E&T or FAE&T to the benefit of our students. And Lisa, I especially appreciated your remarks about colleges or how colleges can partner with Leo to make sure that the funding sources are from the state level. I just want to amplify that when we look at the budget, which is submitted annually, that it is recommended that colleges consider and submit their budget to their Michigan Works agency ahead of time so that those discussions can take place before you actually submit your proposal to become a PLUS provider. So I just wanted to kind of underscore some of those remarks. Now I'm going to talk very high level regarding funding streams, because I know that the financial individuals at your colleges are going to be the experts in this realm of the conversation of FAE&T. I do know that the public community colleges, different for tribal colleges, but typically have 3 sources of funding. So going back to your question early, Mary, those sources are state appropriations, local property taxes, tuitions, and fees. So when we think about identifying non-federal dollars, we need to consider where the funds are, what funds are coming into the college first. And then of those streams of funding, what amount is non-federal that can be, that's not already paired with a federal grant. Those monies are what would be used to spend on the FAE&T activities. College financial personnel, again, are going to be the experts on identifying the exact funding sources that are non-federal, but a few that could be considered and reviewed to assess and ensure that they're non-federal programs would be that of the school aid fund. I know that scholarships your colleges receive that are non-federal are also reimbursable and can be considered. Scholarships like the Police Officers and Firefighters Survival Tuition Grant that provides a waiver to tuition for children and surviving spouses of Michigan police officers and firefighters. You could look at that. Also consider the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, which provides renewable scholarships for undergraduate students. Emergency scholarship programs at your college, especially if those funds may be procured through employee or community donations. That's another stream that you could look at. And then perhaps dual enrollment. This was a question I kind of had for SJI and ACCT, if dual enrollment is something that colleges could look at. Identifying programs on your campus or on your college campus that work with students is another great thing to do. So look at the programs that are already in existence that are supporting students that traditionally experience barriers to enrollment and persistence, and look at how those specific programs are funded, and then work backwards, if you will, to establish your budget or those non-federal funds. So for example, you could look at the department on your campus that supports students with experience in foster care as a means of identifying non-federal funds. I know that there's the Fostering Future Scholarship that could be another potential non-federal source that you could look at as well. So again, the financial individuals are going to be the experts on your campus, partnering with the Michigan Works Agency to make sure that your funds are non-federal are going to be really key here. And so with that, I'll kind of just pause and see if there are any questions. Jose.
Thank you, Precious. And I'm going to lean on Susan and Kate here just to confirm that I'm not giving you 100% wrong information. But one thing to keep in mind is that students that are enrolled in dual enrollment may not be eligible for the program because they are probably under 18. And if I'm not mistaken, the program has limits around age, has like restrictions around age. So it's intended for adults who have already gone through high school, who need that leg up in terms of workforce training.
That's right. Thank you, Jose.
And I would just double check with Michigan policy. So we in Oregon were able to serve 16 and 17-year-olds. What we couldn't do is supplant the K-12 funding. So dual enrollment frequently has K-12 funding infused in it at all. And so there's concern that if you are enrolling and providing services that should be provided by K-12, that's the rub there. However, there are some instances where we would work with our human service agency and we were able to serve 16 and 17-year-olds sometimes, for instance, if they weren't enrolled and they weren't attached to a school district anymore, right? Like if you have any programs like GED completion programs, wraparound supports, those would be eligible if they were not funded through K-12, and you could demonstrate that depending on your state policy. But generally, absolutely, yes, it's generally 18 and over, and you need to be careful with that 16, 17-year-old, but the K-12 funding, think of it as like a big, huge corridor, like a big wall that you cannot blend. And that's much harder to kind of leverage those resources and provide services. There just needs to be a lot of documentation around it. But if you have programs, we had some programs for foster youth or students who had dropped out, and we were able to enroll them and provide supports there.
So I'll just clarify that in Michigan right now, our SNAP ENT program is 18 and up.
But that, just to piggyback off of what Kate said, that depending on what programs you're already offering, you could get creative, right? You could offer programs for students who are transitioning out of homelessness, out of not homelessness, foster care, who are transitioning out of foster care, who probably need a lot of support. I know some states have tried to frame some programs specifically targeting specific populations like foster youth and veterans and so on.
Yep, absolutely. And that would be something that the conversation we would have to have with our partner, at the Department of Health and Human Services, because right now they have limited, because that's our focus, to 18 and up. But obviously, you're right, you can get creative, and maybe that's something, if we see there's the great need, that it'd be great if somebody made that proposal. But right now, we are limited to 18.
Lisa, are you ready to move into your pieces? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, let me. All right.
Okay. So what I wanted to do here today is, we've been talking about the relationship between the Michigan Works Agency and the community colleges. And, Kate's really, done a great job of framing this as this is a partnership that you have with each other. And this is a unique type grant, being a reimbursement grant, where the community colleges are funding the program and serving the students on SNAP, and then they're just receiving that reimbursement. So this is a basic flow chart. I use the colors there so you can distinguish who's kind of in the role at the time. But I'm hoping this is just kind of a high level so you can see how you work together, and it'll give you some time frames too. So it is the Michigan Works Agency who is going to be working with the community college. They're going to be making sure the community colleges are aware of all the what qualifies as an expenditure, helping you with those funding sources to ensure, especially those ones that you're receiving from the state. They'll work with us to make sure that we can tell you if you can't figure, if you haven't figured it out yet, that that they're not used as a match. And then they're going to show you how that budget template works. We do have a pretty standard budget template that aligns with a lot of guidance that's come out through FNS, so you may have seen it and some of your other technical assistants. But I tried to keep the budget template to look like this is how much the component is costing, and then that reimbursement is just the end result. But when we think about our budgets, I like us to think about what does it cost to deliver this component at the college. So if we go to step 2, this is what the colleges are going to do. They're going to determine what does it cost for this activity that I'm going to offer up to a SNAP student, and what are the supportive services that I'm going to offer up. And I'm going to take a look at that, and then I'm going to go, okay, this is what I have to offer. This is what it costs to run this, welding program, the CNA certificate, whatever it may be, in whichever track that you're going through in your college program areas. But then I'm going to, at the next point, I'm going to say, okay, these are all my costs. Now I need to look in there, and this is where the MWA will help. I need to look in there and make sure I don't have any costs that FNS won't pay for. There's not a lot of them, but there are a few. So that's where we look at the guidance and we make sure that we understand that we pull those expenditures out, or those costs out, excuse me. And then what we're doing with the budget is then now we're trying to come up with how many of our students do we think will qualify for this program, and who will agree to participate in the program. Because it's not just about how many are on SNAP right? And how many are in these? It's how many are on SNAP who are going to enroll in the programs that I'm saying make sense for my FA&T Plus program, and how many want to do it? How many, because they are signing on to a federally funded program. While they may not see it, it is attached to that. So they are going to assign it, you know, and so you're looking at your budget, you're kind of drilling it down. So you're going to get your budget down to that. And you're going to go back and forth with the MWA and, you know, with any questions that you have. At the point that you feel like, yep, I understand it, you're going to be submitting a budget to the MWA, and you're going to be, when I say you're going to be submitting descriptions of activities, the MWA puts together the proposal packet. I know we've talked about this packet and people have said, what's this packet? When is it due? So I'm going to say, I would say by April 1st, it would be great if you were able to submit something, not this year, but you know, by April 1st, you'd be able to submit something to your MWA as a first wave of, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And you guys would have time to work together in May. Those are flexible, but, and as you come into the program and each year you're in it, obviously you're going to have less and less questions and you're not going to have to be 2 months out. But that's, if you're looking at a time frame, I would say work on those budgets and talk with MWA and have something started by April 1st. Because the MWA is going to review that information, ask you questions, ask me questions. So we're going to go through that same process. And they're going to put together a full packet. So the proposal packet is the responsibility of the MWA, but it's based on information they receive from the college. The budget is definitely the responsibility of the college. They're the only ones who really knows what it's going to cost, and they're the ones who are attesting to this is what I'm proposing and what I think, how many students I'm going to be able to enroll. So I'm asking the Michigan Works agencies to submit their proposal packets to me by June 1st. That proposal packet, in addition to the budget and the description of the activities, has a description of the organization that they're contracting with. So, you know, letting me know that it's a community college in the areas that you serve. So they will be, they may give you my forms and ask you to, you know, fill those out. They may do an RFP. Everybody's different across the state. They may have their own questions that they ask to get down to the responses that I need to understand what the organization is offering. There are some attestations, some assurances that will be, you know, in that packet as well. But the packet is the responsibility of the Michigan Works agency to get it to me by June 1st so that I have time to review it. Same process. If I have questions, I'm going to write them up and send them back to the Michigan Works agency and we'll work together. And then I have to, once it's all completed, I'm rolling up each of our plus providers, you know, so each college, I'm rolling it up into DHHS's state plan. And that is due by August 1st. So it may seem like 2 months, but it's a long time for me, but it's really not when I have all the proposals from not just the colleges. So that is the time frame that I work with. Everything linked here is in accordance to the manual in chapter 6. It's a pretty daunting procedure chapter that's very specific on how those forms are filled out. The majority of it is, of course, written to the Michigan Works agency, but I think if you take a look at it and see what pieces the college, and it's mainly around the budget, that would be helpful for you as well. So that was a lot, but I'm hoping the visual is helpful. Okay, so this here is just, I just want to talk about the pieces of, you know, this proposal packet and this whole process. There's like different sections of it. So I'm always looking at the MWA is going to engage that plus provider. And these are just some of the high level things that they're going to do. It's just really what I just talked about, creating those budgets and compiling the packet. And it is just an ongoing conversation, and it'll happen every year. But hopefully as you go through it, you're just tweaking things, you're adding more components. You're maybe finding that you can add more customers, you've got more students, so your budgets are bigger. But so there's just that first piece of the MWA and the colleges really working together and consulting with the state as needed. And then I work with the MWAs for that June, for the state plan in August. So that's that, and that is the big one. I really think that's the hardest one to get everybody accustomed to. Next part, you don't really have to worry. That's really just on me, MDHHS, and the MWAs, just showing you that I do have a very specific timeline to get these done. So I really need the MWAs to be able to adhere to that June 1st, which is going to require the colleges, especially the first year, to kind of start on that as early as possible. You could always plug in numbers later that are more specific, but if you go through, the conversation piece of what components that you are going to offer up your PLUS students, it'll be easier to get it done and have it approved in time.
Robert, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just wanted to know, is this program intended to operate the same as the state fiscal year, or?
Yeah, and that is what is kind of complicated here. I think the first year it might be because we are on a fiscal year, so we're October 1. So depending on how your community colleges bill, and I know we want to get into that, not today, but you might see to be able to budget for something that happens prior to October 1st. I can see your budgets being kind of a rollover maybe of your community college calendar. So because the funding does come out again in the October 1.
Okay. And then the second thing, just for clarity, I thought I heard you say something about an RFP, and I was understanding previously that it wasn't a requirement to do RFPs with
Correct.
this program. Okay.
Yes, it is not a requirement to do, but there are some Michigan Works agencies who, by their standards, do RFPs for all things. I don't believe that is with GST, but Mary can correct me if I'm wrong. But I just do need to put that out there that some Michigan Works agencies do require RFPs for all their contractors. Is there one more step in this, Kate?
Yeah, and let's get Precious's question, and then I'll move.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. I believe you answered it through Robert's question. I just wanted to confirm that August would be the earliest that colleges could begin administering services to students. Is that correct?
No, actually, that's a really good point.
October.
Yeah, October 1st. Yes. So that's why I say for the community colleges, I think it's our second year that we're really going to adjust that budget to make sure that you've got enough funding to get you started in your new school year and at the end of our fiscal year. So, but yeah, so that we do run October 1 to September 30th for the funding. Onboarding, this is the MWA's responsibility to onboard, and I know we can go into that another time, but again, they're just helping, and this is fiscal, I'm just limiting it to fiscal, but they have onboarding for program as well. But making sure that your fiscal staff really understands how to do the invoice process, what is required. Our invoice process from the state is actually quite small. Our invoice only requires you to give a value for program services that you provided and so supportive services that you provided. It's really just two budget lines, or sorry, two invoice lines. This is how much I spent on 10 customers, 10 students this month. And then you do have to say the individual line item where you got, you know, where you, what money you use to support those 10 students. Each MWA may have, you're going to work with your MWA to decide what that line item detail is that you keep back at your college. It doesn't come in through our invoice packet. They may ask you, we always suggest the first few months that the MWA really look at that line item detail that's held back to make sure that the community college is capturing everything and able to draw down all the funding that they are eligible for. And once you two work together and have a good handle on that, then they'll just test it like they would test any other financial grant. So that onboarding is just to show you that that comes from the MWA's responsibility, make sure you're understanding. And then the invoicing is a process, and that they will just review your invoices based on, you know, the already determined documentation that is needed, and provide your reimbursement, and they have 60 days for reimbursement. I will say that we are looking at, it does say here that the invoice period right now by the manual says that the colleges or any entity invoices the MWA within 10 days, beginning of the first, beginning of the month, so 10 days after the month end. We are going to look into whether that timeframe should be changed. So I would love to have some dialogue with fiscal staff at the community colleges to say, really, when could you bill out for last month's? Or we need to have that conversation of, would you just be billing out quarterly, or whatever your tuition is based on, and not invoicing monthly? This is a time and plus policy that we're actually looking at changing from our current, you're billing out every month and it is 10 days after the end of the previous month, you're going to provide an invoice to the MWA. So just to put that out there, and if somebody wants to be part of that conversation, definitely let me know, because we do need to look into that further.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a lot of great information. And I'm thinking, so one of the things, and we know this is a lot of information just with all the fiscal stuff and the process. So what we wanted to do, hopefully today, is give an overview. We also know you all have been working with ACCT and SJI as well. But what we're going to do as a follow-up to this is send out the actual budget form. We're going to send out some tools from ACCT, and I'll turn it over to Steve and team to talk about that in a minute. And then I will also share just our sample budget that we used in Oregon. It looks a little bit different, but it's close enough. I think you can see how we took a program budget and transitioned it into our ENT budget, as well as our narrative proposal. So you can see some of the descriptions that we used in case they're helpful. So we wanted to give you a chance to look at all of that information and kind of think through it and look at it, bring in the right partners. Steve, do you want to talk about some of the ACCT tools as well?
Sure, and Jose can make sure I'm listing everything I'm supposed to, but as part of our project, we created 3 provider readiness roadmaps with the help of SJI and APHSA on our current project. And so these, each one covers a different, I guess, aspect of SNAP employment and training. And so it's sort of a, like it's titled, a roadmap in order to just sort of, look at your institution, match it up with the roadmap to make sure that you've got all the elements that you are needing to get started. There is some stuff on, institutional alignment, the application process, and and there also is some information on funding. And so, it's a nice tool to sort of couple with what Kate and her team have put together around, the more tools that point you in the right direction, the better. And so I think, we'll be happy to share this out with the group. And I don't know if Jose or Susan, if you want to add anything to information around these roadmaps.
No, the only thing I'll add is that I believe we're actually going to touch on a little bit of those in a later session as well, go a little bit more in depth, give you more information. So this is a bit of a preview for what you can expect. But as Steve said, these roadmaps are designed to take you where you are, whether you're just exploring the feasibility to see if the program is a good fit for your college, to you are ready to apply, to I'm ready to submit and start getting the program off the ground. So it's a really good way to sort of take a checklist and go through and figure out if you have everything that you should be thinking about and see if there's things that you haven't thought of yet. And then one other thing I will add that we put together last year as part of the project was with SJI, we did a series of foundational of webinars. It touches on a lot of the things we've been talking about in this session and our previous sessions as well. But and we have them recorded. They're from about this time last year. So if you ever need just a refresher, or you have a question, or you want to hear about it again because you couldn't remember what we said, I mean, obviously you can always reach out to us, email us, and we'll be happy to provide an answer. But that's also available there. Or if you have colleagues who are not able to join in these meetings today, or as you start staffing up, or there's always transitions. Those are really good sources for people to get either a refresher or some foundational introduction to different aspects of SNAP ENT.
And just I put the link to the website with all the resources into the chat.
Great. Thank you both so much. So we'll compile those all together. We'll share the recordings. You can share this with colleagues as well. And I do think that's what just seeing the information in different ways over and over seems to be helpful. The other piece too to consider, I think, as you're going back and looking at doing your budgets is, if the 10% holdback that is the administration kind of fee right now, if that's prohibitive, there have been solutions in other states, which could be a longer game, where philanthropy is filled in and covered that, or the state legislator is allocated a certain percentage to cover that. There is a cost for administering and the logistics of billing and things of that sort. But we were able to creatively cover that with other fees in Oregon, and have seen some other states do that. So just consider that as potentially wouldn't want that to prohibit or prevent you from accessing this great funding. And just know that, exactly as Susan said, and with all these investments, one of the things that you can do is show your legislature, like, hey, we took all of your funding and then we brought in additional X dollars of federal funding over time. And sometimes that can support the administration and structure that you want and need to expand it. So just consider that. At the next session, we know we have done a lot of talking today. We want to have it much more interactive and time to answer your questions. So we'll send these resources out, and then we'll create space to kind of dive into the budgets and questions that come up and process, as well as start thinking about the case management and how would you build some of that and some of the reporting structures there. Team, anything else I am missing or details we should add?
I would just suggest, while it's fresh, if you guys have questions, send them in ahead of time, and so that we can build them into the next session, because that would be great if we have something to start with to get the ball rolling for people to talk about it. So anything that anybody comes up with, if we can get those questions.
Jamie, I see you come off mute.
I just wanted to add, I think there's little M can do to help with the legwork that has to be done to lift this stuff off the ground. But I think we just want to share excitement for the potential of the support for current students and colleges and new students that aren't currently, as we think about enrollment crises, as we think about reaching students who don't think our colleges serve them or serve them well. We see a whole lot of potential here, but also an opportunity for colleges to get their hands on some resources they don't currently have. all that to say, it's not no work. We'd love to hear from you all, not right now, but like in general, how we could be helpful, where you see gaps, what could be helpful if it's not us playing that role to help move this stuff into a space of possibility, as opposed to like the craziness of budgeting and paperwork and the admin burden that is so real. What might it look like for us to be helpful to make this a reality? So we'd love to hear from you. You can shoot me an email, you can call us, you could reach out to whomever from the Michigan support team, but we'd love to know how we can be helpful. We think there's a lot of opportunity.
Thank you, Jamie. That's amazing. And that's like such a gift to have you involved in this work from the get-go. And I just want to end, I know this is a lot of an administration and paperwork, but it is so worth it. And I say that 100%, having done it at a state and like local level, is work through and pass that, because the potential is enormous, as Jamie lifted up. And I think once you get the system set up, the budget down, it actually is easier to administrate, to run with the program and lead the program and administer it month to month. It's just the investment of getting it set up, but the payback is enormous, and especially for students. So it's really life transforming. And it can raise awareness with policymakers as well around what students really need. So push through it and those partnerships, it's worth it. And with that, we are at time. So we'll send out the recording materials. And as Lisa said, please send your questions to us, your concerns or things that didn't make sense. Like please flag that, and we'll revisit it at the next meeting, and appreciate all your time and effort.